Welcome to the second lesson in Session 6 on quadrilaterals. A quadrilateral is a four-sided polygon, and a common property of all quadrilaterals is that the sum of their interior angles adds to 360 degrees. We're going to learn about 6 different types of quadrilaterals. There's the kite, the trapezoid, and the parallelogram. Now the next 3 are actually subsets of a parallelogram. So some special types of parallelogram that we're going to discuss is the rhombus, the rectangle, and the square. So we start with the kite. There's 3 properties of a kite that we're going to discuss. The first is that there are 2 pairs of congruent adjacent sides. So in the kite that's provided below, side AC is congruent to side AD, and side BC is congruent to sides BD. Next, there is exactly 1 pair of opposite angles that are congruent. And the congruent angles are always going to be in between the 2 unequal sides. So angle C and angle D are congruent. And by unequal, the angle between unequal sides, AC and CB are not congruent lengths, and angle C is in between them. So the congruent angle is always in between the non-congruent sides. Lastly, the diagonals of a kite are perpendicular to each other. So AB is going to be congruent to segment CD. Next, we're going to discuss the trapezoid. A trapezoid has 1 pair of parallel sides. And if you have an isosceles trapezoid, that means that the non-parallel sides are congruent. And again, similar to the kite, the diagonals of an isosceles trapezoid are going to be congruent to each other, or are perpendicular to each other. The diagonals of an isosceles trapezoid are perpendicular to each other. Next, we have a trapezoid. So there's a regular trapezoid, just means that we have 1 pair of parallel sides. An isosceles trapezoid is a little bit more specific. In an isosceles trapezoid, that means that the non-parallel sides are congruent. So you have 1 pair of parallel sides, and the other pair of sides are going to be congruent to each other. Additionally, in an isosceles trapezoid, the base angles are going to be congruent to each other, as are the top angles. And just like in a kite, the diagonals of an isosceles trapezoid are going to be perpendicular to each other. Next, we have a parallelogram. So in a parallelogram, you'll have 2 pairs of parallel sides. So the opposite sides of a parallelogram are parallel. In addition to that, the opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent, as are the opposite angles. And next, in a parallelogram, the consecutive angles are going to be supplementary. So while angle C is equal to angle B and angle A is equal to angle D, those are the opposite angles are congruent. When you look at how angle A relates to angle C, those are going to be supplementary angles. So angle A and angle C add to 180 degrees, angle B and angle D add to 180 degrees. Next, we have a rectangle. Now, a rectangle is a special type of parallelogram. So a rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 90-degree angles. And we have a rhombus. A rhombus is also a special type of parallelogram. A rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. And lastly, we have a square. Now, a square is a special type of parallelogram because it fits under the subset of being a rectangle. It also fits under the subset of being a rhombus. So it's got 4 congruent sides, 4 90-degree angles. And again, the opposite sides are parallel, the opposite angles are congruent, and the diagonals are going to be perpendicular. Now, each of these different quadrilaterals has different formulas that can be used for area and perimeter. For the area of a square, we just take a side and multiply it by itself, a times a. For the perimeter, we just add all the four sides together, so that can be simplified as 4a. For the area of a rectangle, we take length times width, or in this case, in this diagram, it would be a times b. And for the perimeter, we take a plus b and multiply it by 2, because there's 2 a's, 2 b's. Again, for a parallelogram, same as a rectangle, we take base times the height, and also the same for the perimeter. There's 2 a's and 2 b's, so to find the perimeter of a parallelogram would be 2 times the sum of a plus b. Trapezoid is a little bit different. To find the area of a trapezoid, we take 1/2 of a plus b times the height. And for the perimeter of a trapezoid, since all four sides sometimes are of different lengths, we just take a plus b plus c plus d. And for the area of a rhombus, we actually use, to find the area, we use the diagonals. So it would be 1/2 of diagonal 1 times diagonal 2. And the perimeter of a rhombus is the same as finding the perimeter of a square, since all of the sides are congruent, would be 4 times a. Now here's the quadrilateral family. So there's 3 different types of quadrilaterals. You have a parallelogram, a trapezoid, and a kite. And the parallelogram has a few subsets. You have a rhombus and a rectangle, and they both kind of meet to meet the subset of both of them as a square. So a square is a rhombus, it's a rectangle, it's a parallelogram, and it's a quadrilateral. And again, you always hear a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not necessarily a square. A trapezoid, we need to understand the difference between a regular trapezoid and an isosceles trapezoid, and we also have a kite. So parallelogram, trapezoid, and kite, and then the subsets are rhombus, rectangle, and square are special types of parallelograms, and an isosceles trapezoid is a special type of trapezoid. That wraps up our lesson. So good luck on the quiz, and email us if you have any questions.